The city of Ouroboros did not breathe. It pulsated with the frantic, electric hum of 10 million souls trying to outrun their own insignificance. It was a metropolis of neon scars and limestone monuments where the air tasted of ozone and expensive regret. High above the gridlocked streets, perched on the 44th floor of a building that whispered of old money and new shadows, Isola stood in her sanctuary. Her penthouse was a masterpiece of clinical minimalism, white marble floors, floor-to-ceiling glass, and a silence so profound it felt heavy. Isola was a digital archivist, a restorer of ghosts. She spent her days sifting through corrupted data files, stitching together the digital remains of the elite. She was a surgeon of memory, a woman who lived in the past because the present felt too jagged to touch. Her name, Isola, was more than an identity. It was a manifesto. She was an island. She had built her life behind firewalls and encryption, ensuring that no one could ever reach the shores of her private heart. But tonight, the silence of the island was broken. "The tea is getting cold, Miss Isola, a waste of a harvest that only yields 3 kilograms a year." The voice was like a sudden frost. Isola flinched, the tablet in her hand nearly slipping to the marble floor. She turned to see Elias, the butler she had hired only 6 days ago. He stood by a table of blackened oak, his posture as rigid as a tombstone. He was a man of 60, with eyes the colour of stagnant water, and a presence that always seemed to occupy more space than a single human should. "I didn't hear you come in, Elias," Isola said, her voice sounding thin against the vast glass walls. "One does not hear the tide coming in, Miss Isola. One simply notices that the sand is wet," Elias replied. His smile did not reach his eyes. "You have been staring at that data string for 3 hours. Are you trying to find a person, or are you trying to lose yourself?" Isola narrowed her eyes. "I'm working, Elias, that's all. You can leave the tray." "As you wish, but remember, an island is only an island until the sea decides otherwise." He bowed, a gesture that felt less like respect and more like an omen. As he retreated into the shadows of the hallway, the lights in the penthouse flickered. At first it was a subtle stutter, a blink in the power grid. Then the hum of the servers, the constant white noise of Isola's existence died. One by one, the monitors that lined her workspace went dark. The blue glow of her life was extinguished, leaving only the sickly orange smear of the city lights bleeding through the windows. Isola's heart began to hammer against her ribs. Her security system, a military-grade network that she had personally coded, didn't even trigger an alarm. It had been bypassed with a surgical precision that was impossible. "Elias!" she called out. No answer. The air in the room changed. It lost the sterile scent of air conditioning and took on the aroma of something primordial: damp earth, crushed ferns, and the cold, waxy smell of ancient beeswax. It was the scent of a forest that had never seen the sun. "Elias is no longer in your employ, Isola. He has returned to his true master." The voice did not come from the hallway. It came from the shadows of her favourite armchair, a velvet wingback that faced the window. Isola's breath hitched. She couldn't see him clearly yet, but she felt the gravity of him. He was a black hole in the centre of her universe, pulling all the light into himself. "Who are you?" she whispered, her fingers fumbling for a heavy glass paperweight on her desk. "A curator of rare things," the voice replied. It was a low, resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of her bones. The figure stood up. He was tall, impossibly tall, and dressed in a black cashmere sweater and tailored trousers that seemed to absorb the moonlight. As he stepped into the pale glow of the windows, Isola finally saw him. Malakor. His face was a landscape of harsh angles and predatory grace. His skin was pale, his hair dark, but it was his eyes that froze her blood. They were obsidian, not just black, but reflective and hard, as if they were made of the volcanic rock itself. "You have a very beautiful collection of memories here," Malakor said, gesturing vaguely at the darkened monitors. "But you have neglected the most important archive of all." "I don't know what you're talking about. Get out of my house or I'll call—" "The police? The private security you pay 15,000 a month to provide? They aren't coming, Isola. To them, this building is currently empty. To the grid, you don't exist. You have been erased." He moved toward her, not with the haste of an intruder, but with the slow, crushing inevitability of a glacier. Isola backed away until her heels hit the glass window. The abyss of the city yawned behind her. 44 stories of air and death. "What do you want from me?" "I want to protect you," Malakor said, and for a fleeting second his voice sounded almost gentle, a softness that was more terrifying than a shout. He stopped just a few feet from her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I have watched you for 3 years, Isola. I watched you cry over the lost photographs of the Tanaka family. I watched you spend 6 weeks restoring the only recording of a dead woman's voice for a son who didn't deserve it. You are a restorer of pieces, but you are broken yourself. You've been spying on me." The realization made her skin crawl. Every private moment, every tear, every secret thought she had whispered to the empty air of her apartment. He had been there. "I have been observing," he corrected, "and I have been dunning the world on your behalf. Do you remember Marcus Thorne, the man who blackmailed you into silence at the academy? The man who nearly drove you to leap from this very window 4 years ago?" Isola felt the phantom weight of that memory, the cold air, the ledge, the despair. "How do you know that name?" "Because Marcus Thorne is gone," Malakor said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound ledger. He opened it to a page and turned it toward her. There, in elegant, handwritten script, was Marcus's name. A single, thick line of black ink was drawn through it. "He will never speak again. He will never breathe the same air as you. Every man who has ever touched your life and left a bruise has been curated." Isola shook her head, tears of terror and confusion stinging her eyes. "You're a murderer. You're a monster." "I am a solution," Malakor replied. He took another step, his presence overwhelming her, boxing her in against the cold glass. "The world is a chaotic, filthy place, Isola. People like you, people with souls made of glass and light, are not meant to be left out in the rain. You are an island, yes. But islands are meant to be owned. They are meant to be kept." "I am not a thing. You can't just take a person." "I am not taking you, Isola. I am recovering you. You were lost in the noise of this city. You were drowning in the archives of strangers. I am bringing you home to the ossuary." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. Isola flinched, but he didn't strike her. Instead, he tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His touch was cold, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her that she couldn't explain. It was a terrifying, magnetic pull, the allure of a power so absolute it promised to take away the burden of choice. "I have prepared a place for you," he whispered, his face inches from hers. "A place where the air is pure and the silence is sacred. A place where no one can ever hurt you again. But there is a price for such sanctuary." "I won't go with you." "You already have," Malakor said. He produced a small, amber-coloured droplet from a silk pouch. It glowed with a faint, internal pulse, like a trapped heartbeat. "This is a biotether, a piece of the ossuary's legacy. It will bond with your nervous system. It will tell me when you are sad. It will tell me when you are dreaming. It will ensure that our hearts beat in a single, perfect rhythm. No, please. Elias, Malakor called out softly. The butler stepped out of the shadows, holding a silver tray. On it was a single, crystal atomizer. Before Isola could scream, Elias pressed the trigger. A fine mist of lavender and something metallic filled her lungs. Isola's knees buckled. The strength fled from her limbs, as if a plug had been pulled. As she began to fall, Malakor caught her. His arms were like iron bands, cold and unyielding. He lifted her against his chest, her head lolling against his shoulder. "Look at the city one last time, Isola," he murmured into her ear. "Look at the lights. Look at the chaos. This is the last time you will ever have to see it. From now on, your world is me." Isola tried to fight, to lift her arms, to bite, to do anything. But the mist was a heavy blanket, pulling her down into a dark, velvet abyss. She looked at Malakor's face, the obsidian eyes, the cold, beautiful mouth, and for a horrifying second, she felt a sense of relief. The struggle was over. The island had been swallowed by the sea. "Clear the room," Malakor ordered Elias. "Erase the hard drives. Burn the physical files. I want no record that she ever lived in this cage. Isola is no longer an archivist. She is the archive." "Yes, my lord," Elias bowed. As Malakor carried her toward the private elevator, Isola's vision blurred. The last thing she saw was the LED light on her server rack, the light that represented her entire career, her entire identity, turning from green to red, and then, finally, to black. The silence that followed was not the silence of her penthouse. It was the silence of a tomb or a temple. She felt the elevator descend, the gravity shifting in her gut. She was being moved from the world of the living into the world of the ossuary. She was being claimed by a predator who called his obsession protection, a man who had watched her until he knew the map of her soul better than she did. In the darkness of her fading consciousness, the amber droplet in Malakor's hand seemed to pulse in time with her failing strength. Thump, 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 thump. "You are safe now," his voice echoed in her mind, a haunting promise that sounded like a threat. "You are safe with me." And as the darkness swallowed her whole, Isola realized with a final, chilling clarity. The most dangerous thing in the world wasn't the people who wanted to hurt her. It was the man who had decided that his love was the only thing that could save her. The transition from the velvet darkness of the sedative to the waking world was not a sudden burst of light, but a slow, agonizing crawl through layers of grey consciousness. Isola felt the sensation of weightlessness first, a terrifying buoyancy that made her reach out instinctively for a floor that felt too far away. When her fingers finally made contact, they didn't touch the warm, familiar hardwood of her London penthouse. They touched glass, cold, thick and vibrating with a low-frequency hum that seemed to resonate within her very teeth. Isola's eyes snapped open. For a moment, her brain refused to process the image before her. She was lying on a bed of charcoal silk, but the bed was positioned in the center of a room that appeared to be suspended in mid-air. To her left, to her right, and directly beneath her feet, there was nothing but a transparent precipice. Below the glass floor, thousands of feet of jagged rock and swirling, violent mists of the Atlas mountain range churned like a grey ocean. She wasn't in a room. She was in a bird's nest of obsidian and diamond, perched on a peak that the world had forgotten. The ceiling above was a vaulted dome of dark stone, interlaced with veins of copper that glowed with a rhythmic, amber pulse. It was a mechanical heartbeat, a visual representation of the life support systems, or perhaps something much darker. The synchronization is always difficult for the uninitiated. Your cortisol levels are currently 3 times the human norm. Breathe, Isola. The glass is 3 inches thick. It can withstand a gale, and it can certainly withstand your panic. Isola scrambled backward, her silk slip rustling against the sheets, until her back hit a pillar of cold stone. In the corner of the room, seated by a fireplace that burned with a strange, blue-tinted flame, was an elderly woman. Her hair was a shock of snow white, bound in intricate, gravity-defying braids, and her fingers moved with the frantic, mechanical precision of a spider as she wove a tapestry on a loom made of ivory and bone. "Who are you?" Isola's voice was a ragged whisper, her throat raw from the mist Malakor had used. "Where am I? Where is he?" "I am the Weaver," the woman said, her voice sounding like dry parchment rubbing together. She did not look up from her work. "I am the record keeper of what is lost, and you are at the observatory. It is the highest point of the ossuary's reach. As for Malakor, he is exactly where he needs to be. He is at the center of you." Isola reached for her neck, her breath hitching. The amber droplet was gone, but in its place, just beneath the skin of her collarbone, was a small, hard nodule. It didn't hurt, but it felt alive. It pulsed in perfect synchronization with the copper veins in the ceiling. "What did he do to me?" Isola cried, her fingers digging into the skin, desperate to tear the intrusion out. "He gave you his rhythm," the Weaver replied, finally looking up. Her eyes were milky with cataracts, yet they seemed to pierce through Isola's chest. "You were a woman of erratic pulses, Isola, a woman of anxiety and tremors. He has stabilized you. He has tethered your heart to his. When he is calm, you will be calm. When he is focused, you will find clarity. You are no longer an island drifting in a chaotic sea. You are anchored to the continent of his will." "I don't want to be anchored." Isola stood up, her legs trembling so violently she nearly collapsed back onto the silk. She stumbled toward the obsidian door, a massive, seamless slab of rock. There was no handle, no keypad, no way out. She pounded on it until her knuckles bled. "Malakor! Open this door! You can't keep me here. I have a life. People will look for me." "No one is looking, child," the Weaver cackled softly, the sound echoing off the glass walls. "Elias spent the night executing the protocol. Your lease has been terminated. Your bank accounts have been closed and the funds donated to charities in your name. Your digital footprint, every email, every social media post, every fragment of your career has been scrubbed by a worm that leaves nothing but a clean, empty drive behind." To the world of Ouroboros, Isola died of a broken heart and walked into the river. You are a ghost, and ghosts belong in the ossuary. Isola slumped against the door, the cold stone leaching the heat from her body. The horror was total. It wasn't just that he had taken her, he had unmade her. She was a professional archivist. She knew better than anyone how easily a human life could be reduced to data, and how easily that data could be deleted. The door suddenly slid into the floor with a silent, hydraulic hiss. Malakor stood there. He was dressed in a suit of deep charcoal, his presence so immense that the room seemed to shrink. He didn't look like a man who had just kidnapped a woman. He looked like a man who had finally brought home a piece of art he had hunted for a decade. He walked toward her, his movements fluid and predatory, and Isola felt her heart rate spike, only to feel a strange, dampening sensation from the nodule in her neck, forcing her pulse to slow down, forcing her to be still. "You're awake," he said, his voice a low, resonant hum that felt like a caress. "The Weaver, leave us. Your thread is getting tangled." The old woman gathered her silks and vanished through a side passage without a word. Malakor turned his obsidian gaze back to Isola. He didn't speak for a long time. He simply observed her, as if he were memorizing the way the mountain light hit her skin. "Why?" Isola whispered, her voice trembling. "If you wanted my encryption keys, if you wanted my skills for your organization, you could have just hired me. You could have offered me 1 billion credits. Why the cage? Why the erasure?" Malakor reached out, his hand hovering inches from her face. Isola wanted to spit at him, to bite him, but her body felt heavy, sedated by the very pulse in her neck. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch cold and electric. "Because you wouldn't have come for money, Isola. You are too noble for greed. And you wouldn't have come for power. You are too afraid of it." He leaned in, his scent, sandalwood and ancient earth, filling her lungs. "I didn't bring you here to work for me. I brought you here because the world was breaking you. I saw the way you looked at the ledge of your balcony. I saw the way you shivered when a stranger walked too close to you on the street. You were a masterpiece being ruined by a clumsy world. I am simply the gallery that will keep you preserved." "I am not a painting," she hissed, finding a spark of defiance. "I am a human being with the right to be miserable if I choose." "You had that right," Malakor agreed, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And you used it to almost destroy yourself. That right has been revoked. From now on, your only choice is how you wish to be adored." He turned and gestured toward the door. "Come, I have something to show you. It is the reason you were chosen." Isola didn't move. "And if I stay here? If I sit on this floor and never speak to you again?" Malakor paused at the doorway, looking back over his shoulder. "Then you will be safe, but you will be bored. And a mind like yours, Isola, cannot stand a lack of data. You will follow me because you are a curator, and I am the only one who can show you the truth of the world." He was right. Even in her terror, the archivist in her was screaming to know what lay beyond the glass room. She stood up, her legs steadier now, and followed him into the heart of the mountain. The hallways of the observatory were a triumph of brutalist architecture fused with high-tech sorcery. Walls of raw granite were embedded with fiber-optic veins. They passed through a massive gallery where men in white suits worked silently, restoring artifacts that looked thousands of years old. Isola saw things that shouldn't exist: scrolls from the Library of Alexandria that were supposedly burned, lost paintings by Caravaggio, the original blueprints for cities that were never built. "The ossuary is the repository of human excellence that the world was too stupid to keep," Malakor explained as they walked. "We don't just collect art, we collect potential. We collect people who are the only of their kind. You are the only one who can see the patterns in corrupted code as if they were poetry. That gift makes you mine." They reached a set of double doors made of heavy bronze. Malakor placed his hand on the scanner, and the doors groaned open. Isola stepped inside and felt the air leave her lungs. It wasn't a gallery of history. It was a museum of her. The room was filled with objects she thought she had lost years ago. There was the stuffed rabbit with the missing ear she had left on a train when she was 6. There was the diary she had burned in a fit of rage after her first heartbreak. Except it wasn't burned. It was sitting on a velvet pedestal, every page intact. There were the photos of her parents that had been destroyed in the house fire, restored, framed and glowing under spotlights. "How?" she whispered, her hands shaking as she touched the edge of the diary. "I burned this. I watched it turn to ash." "Ash can be reconstructed if you have the right technology and the will to do so," Malakor said, standing behind her. He didn't touch her, but his shadow enveloped her entirely. "Every piece of you that the world tried to take away, I have found. Every memory you thought was gone, I have preserved. You see, Isola, you were never an island. You were a project. I have been building this room for 15 years. I have been preparing for the day you would finally be ready to come home. Isola turned to him, her eyes brimming with tears. It was the ultimate psychological trap. He hadn't just kidnapped her. He had stolen her entire identity and presented it back to her as a gift. He was her captor, her stalker, and her savior, all in one. "You're obsessed," she breathed. "This isn't love, it's a sickness." "Love is a word for commoners," Malakor replied, his obsidian eyes burning with a dark, terrifying light. "What I feel for you is gravity. It is the fundamental law of my existence. You think this room is a cage? Look closer." He walked to a terminal and tapped a command. One of the walls of the museum slid back to reveal a massive server array, humming with a power that Isola could feel in her teeth. This is the heart of the ossuary's intelligence network. From here you can see anything. You can rewrite the digital history of any person on Earth. You can protect the innocent and delete the guilty. I didn't just bring you here to be a prisoner, Isola. I brought you here to be the goddess of the archive. With my power and your mind, we can ensure that nothing precious is ever lost again. He stepped toward her, his hand finally reaching out to cup her cheek. This time, Isola didn't flinch. She was overwhelmed, drowning in the sheer scale of his obsession. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Accept the protection I offer. Work by my side, and in return, I will give you a world where no one can ever hurt you, no one can ever lie to you, and nothing you love will ever die." Isola looked at the restored photo of her parents. They were smiling, their faces clear and bright, free of the smoke and fire that had haunted her dreams for 20 years. Then she looked at Malakor. She saw the monster. She saw the man who had burned her life down just so he could be the one to hand her the ashes. "And if I still want to leave?" she asked, her voice stronger than before. Malakor's expression shifted. The warmth, or the imitation of it, vanished, replaced by the cold, hard obsidian of the predator. He leaned down, his lips brushing against the nodule in her neck. "Then you will learn that the ocean does not just surround the island to keep it safe," he whispered, his breath cold against her skin. "It surrounds it so that it has nowhere else to go. You can fight the tide, Isola, but the tide always wins." He pulled away, leaving her standing in the center of a museum dedicated to her own life. He walked towards the exit, his footsteps echoing in the vast, silent space. "Elias will be here shortly to begin your orientation," he called out, without looking back. "Try not to break anything. Everything in this room is irreplaceable, especially you." As the bronze doors clanged shut, Isola sank to her knees among the ghosts of her childhood. She felt the pulse in her neck, thump, 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 perfectly timed with the humming of the servers. She was the crown jewel of the ossuary. She was safe. She was loved. And as she looked at the glass floor beneath her, she realized she had never been more terrified in her entire life. She was no longer Isola the island. She was Isola the captive, and the man who held the key to her cage was the only one who knew the map of her heart. She realized then that Malakor's greatest weapon wasn't his money or his soldiers. It was the fact that he had made himself the only thing left in her world. To escape him, she would have to destroy herself. And as her fingers traced the restored pages of her diary, she wondered if she was strong enough to burn it all down a second time. The third day in the observatory began not with the sun, but with a shift in the room's ambient light. The copper veins in the ceiling transitioned from a deep, restful violet to a crisp, clinical white. Isola sat at the edge of the bed, her feet hovering over the glass floor. The vertigo was still there, a sickening lurch in her stomach every time she looked down at the mist-shrouded peaks. But the nodule in her neck was already doing its work. As her heart rate climbed in response to the height, she felt a familiar, synthetic wave of calm wash over her. A chemical hand pressing down on her pulse. She was being managed. Every emotion was being curated by a man who wasn't even in the room. There was a soft chime, and the obsidian door slid open. Elias entered, carrying a tray with silver domed covers. He looked exactly as he had in London, the perfect, invisible servant. But now, the sight of him made Isola's skin crawl. "Good morning, Miss Isola. I believe the mountain air has improved your color," Elias said, placing the tray on a small stone table. "Does he pay you in money, Elias? Or does he just keep a ledger of your sins and call it loyalty?" Isola asked, her voice cold. Elias paused, his hand on the silver handle of the teapot. For a split second, the mask slipped. A shadow of weariness, perhaps even a flicker of shame, crossed his face before it vanished back into the porcelain-smooth facade. "In the ossuary, Miss Isola, we do not speak of pay. We speak of purpose. You will find that having a place in a world this chaotic is worth more than any currency. Even if that place is a cage? Especially if the cage is the only thing keeping the wolves away." Elias bowed slightly. "Master Malakor is waiting for you in the sanctum. He expects your first report on the Ouroboros fragments by noon." Isola didn't eat. The food tasted like ash in her mouth. She stood up, straightened the silk dress that felt like a second skin, and walked out of the room. She didn't need a guide. The lights in the floor veins pulsed in the direction she was meant to go. Malakor was literally leading her by her biology. The sanctum was the nerve center of the mountain. It was a cathedral of data where thousands of translucent screens hovered in the air, flickering with the heartbeat of global networks. In the center of the room, Malakor stood before a massive holographic map of the world. He didn't look up as she entered, but the amber light in the room shifted to a warmer hue, a silent greeting from the ship to its passenger. "The Ouroboros servers were more damaged than my team anticipated," Malakor said, his eyes fixed on a glowing data cluster over the Mediterranean. "The encryption is recursive. It's eating itself." "That's because I designed it to do that," Isola said, stepping into the light of the hollows. "I didn't want my work to fall into the hands of someone like you." Malakor finally turned. He looked tired, though it only added to his lethality. "Someone like me? A man who values history? A man who would spend billions to ensure that a single lost poem by Sappho isn't forgotten? A man who thinks he has the right to decide what is remembered and what is erased," Isola countered. Malakor walked toward her, his shadow stretching across the floor. "The world is already erasing itself, Isola. Every day, 1,000 languages die. 1,000,000 photographs are deleted. History is a sandcastle in a hurricane. I am simply the one building a glass wall around it. Now sit. Show me why I spent 3 years hunting you." He gestured to a terminal that looked like it had been carved from a single block of dark glass. As Isola sat, the interface recognized her immediately. Her custom keyboard layout, her preferred color schemes, even her shortcut macros. Everything was exactly as it had been in her penthouse. "You copied my local configuration," she whispered. "I told you, Isola. Nothing is lost here." For the next 4 hours, Isola disappeared into the code. It was the only place she felt powerful. In the digital realm, she wasn't a captive. She was a god. She navigated the fractured partitions of the Ouroboros drive, bypassing the logic bombs she had set herself. Malakor stood behind her, a silent, looming presence. He didn't speak, but she could feel his gaze on the back of her neck, his pulse echoing in her tether. She reached the deepest layer of the drive, the black box, where she kept the most sensitive restorations. But as she began to decrypt the final sector, something strange happened. A file appeared that she didn't recognize. It was hidden behind a triple-blind proxy, using an encryption method that was outdated, something from the early 2000s. It didn't belong in her modern architecture. "Is there a problem?" Malakor's voice was right by her ear. "Just a corrupted sector," Isola lied. Her heart skipped a beat, and she felt the nodule in her neck throb, trying to force the rhythm back down. She had to stay calm. If Malakor felt her excitement through the tether, he would know she'd found something. "I need to run a deep cycle repair," she said, her fingers flying across the keys. "It will take an hour. You should go curate something." Malakor lingered for a moment, his hand resting on the back of her chair. The heat of him was distracting, a heavy magnetic pull. "Don't work too hard, Isola. You are the most precious thing in this room. I would hate for you to wear yourself out on ghosts." He turned and left, the bronze doors hissing shut behind him. The moment he was gone, Isola isolated the strange file. She didn't use the main terminal. She routed the data through a secondary air-gapped handheld unit she had surreptitiously pulled from a repair kit on the desk. The encryption fell away under her touch. It wasn't a data file, it was a video log. The screen flickered to life. The image was grainy, shot in the very room she was sitting in. But the furniture was different. A man sat in the chair. A man with deep shadows under his eyes and a frantic, haunted look. "My name is Julian Thorne," the man said. His voice was a cracked whisper. "If you are reading this, you are my successor. And if you are my successor, you are already dead. You just don't know it yet." Isola's breath caught. Thorne. The same last name as Marcus, the man Malakor said he had removed for her. "Malakor doesn't collect archives," Julian continued, glancing nervously toward the door. "He collects loops. He finds people at their lowest point, people who have lost everything, and he recreates their world. He makes himself the sun, the moon, and the oxygen. But it's a lie. He doesn't save you from the darkness. He creates the darkness so he can be the one to turn on the light." Julian leaned closer to the camera. "I was the one before you. I restored the records of the first ossuary. But I found something. The ossuary isn't a museum of human history. It's a list of targets. Malakor isn't preserving the past. He's clearing the way for a future where he owns the narrative of every major bloodline on Earth. He's not a curator, he's an editor. And when an editor is done with a draft, he deletes the notes." A loud bang echoed from the video. Julian flinched. "He's coming. He knows I've found the origin file. It's hidden in the Weaver's loom. The bone. Look at the bone. If you want to know who Malakor really is, if you want to know why he chose you specifically, find the origin." The video cut to static. Isola sat in the silence of the sanctum, the handheld unit trembling in her hand. Her heart was racing so fast, the biotether was practically vibrating, sending sharp stabs of synthetic calm into her bloodstream. It felt like her veins were filled with ice water and fire at the same time. "He creates the darkness so he can be the one to turn on the light." The words echoed in her mind. She thought of Marcus Thorne. She thought of the fire that killed her parents. She thought of the random data leaks that had ruined her reputation at the academy. Was it possible? Had Malakor been the architect of every tragedy in her life, just to ensure she had nowhere to go, but to him? "Isola!" She jumped, nearly dropping the handheld unit. Malakor was standing in the doorway. He hadn't made a sound. "The hour is up," he said, walking toward her. His eyes were narrowed, his gaze darting to the terminal, then to her hands. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Isola tucked the hand held into the folds of her silk dress, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sector was beyond repair, she said, her voice remarkably steady despite the terror. I had to purge it. Malakor stopped in front of her. He reached out and tilted her chin up, forcing her to look into his obsidian eyes. You're lying, he said softly. I'm not. Your heart rate is 130. The tether is struggling to compensate. You've seen something that has frightened you. He leaned in, his thumb brushing over the pulse point in her neck. Tell me, Isola, what did the ghosts say to you? They told me that this room is full of lies, she spat, her anger finally overriding her fear. Malakor smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of a wolf watching a lamb grow its first set of teeth. All history is a lie, Isola. It is a story told by the survivors. I am simply making sure that our story is the most beautiful one ever written. He leaned down, his lips ghosting over hers, but he didn't kiss her. It was a gesture of total dominance, a reminder that even her breath belonged to him. Go to your room. Reflect on the value of the truth. And remember, the weaver is watching. She sees the threads long before the tapestry is finished. Isola turned and fled the sanctum, her mind screaming. She didn't go to her room. Instead, she navigated the winding granite corridors toward the weaver's chamber. The old woman was still there, sitting by the blue fire, her fingers dancing over the bone loom. She didn't look up as Isola burst in. Julian Thorne sent me, Isola panted. The weaver's fingers stopped. The silence in the room became absolute. Slowly, the old woman turned her milky eyes toward Isola. Julian was a soft boy, she whispered. He thought the truth would set him free. He didn't realize that in the ossuary, the truth is just a heavier set of chains. He said the origin file is here, Isola said, stepping toward the loom. He said the bone holds the secret. Why did Malakor choose me? What happened to my parents? The weaver sighed, a sound like wind through a graveyard. She reached out and touched one of the upright posts of the loom, a long, polished white bone that looked suspiciously like a human femur. She pressed a hidden catch, and a small panel slid open. Inside was a single, ancient micro SD card. Malakor didn't find you by accident, Isola, the weaver said, her voice trembling. He didn't watch you for 3 years. He's been watching you for 25. He didn't save you from the fire. He was the one who lit the match. Isola took the card, her world tilting on its axis. Why? She whispered. Because, the weaver said, looking back at her loom, he needed an island, and you can't have an island until you sink everything else around it. As Isola backed out of the room, clutching the card to her chest, she felt a sudden, sharp pain in her neck. The amber nodule turned a bright, angry crimson. Thump, 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 thump. The rhythm changed. It wasn't just his heart anymore, it was a countdown. Behind her, in the shadows of the hallway, she heard the slow, rhythmic click of Malakor's boots on the stone floor. He wasn't running. He didn't need to. In his world, there was nowhere left to hide. Isola! His voice drifted through the darkness, rich and calm. I hope you found the answers you were looking for, because now we have to talk about the consequences of knowing too much. Isola turned and ran, not toward her room, but toward the glass balcony of the observatory. The mist was thick, the abyss was waiting, and for the first time in her life, the fall looked like the only way to be free. The wind at the edge of the observatory didn't just blow, it screamed. At this altitude, the air was a predatory thing, thin and freezing, clawing at Isola's silk dress as she stood on the narrow glass-railed balcony. Behind her lay the sanctum, a tomb of high-tech lies and stolen memories. Below her lay the abyss of Mount Atlas, a jagged moor of granite and ice. In her hand, the micro SD card felt heavier than the mountain itself. The weaver's words, he lit the match, reverberated in her skull, drowning out the frantic, synthetic rhythm of the biotether in her neck. Every tragedy, every lonely night, every tear she had shed over her parents' ashes had been a scene directed by the man now walking toward her. The obsidian doors hissed open. Malakor stepped onto the balcony. He didn't look angry. That was the horror of it. He looked disappointed, like a father watching a child play too close to a fireplace he had spent hours building. The moonlight caught the sharp planes of his face, casting shadows that made him look less like a man and more like a statue, carved from the mountain's own dark heart. "The air is dangerous tonight, Isola," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the wind. "Come away from the edge. You're shivering." "Did you do it?" Isola's voice was a jagged shard of glass. She didn't turn to look at him. She kept her eyes on the swirling grey mists below. The fire in 2006, the house in the hills, my father screaming for me to get out, my mother, she never even made it to the door. The silence that followed was longer than any silence Isola had ever known. Then she heard the slow, deliberate click of his boots on the glass floor. He was moving closer. "Your father was a gambler, Isola," Malakor said, his tone conversational, almost academic. Not with money, but with information. He held records that belonged to the ossuary. He thought he could sell a piece of our soul to the highest bidder. I offered him a way out. I offered him a life of luxury in exchange for the files. He refused. "So you burned them," she whispered, finally turning to face him. Her eyes were red, but her gaze was lethal. "You burned a family because of paper." "I cleared the brush so the rare flower could grow," Malakor replied. He was only 5 feet away now. "If I had let them live, you would have grown up in a world of mediocrity. You would have been a middle manager in a failing tech firm. You would never have discovered the genius inside you. I didn't destroy your life, Isola. I pruned it. I made you the masterpiece you are today." "You're a monster," she spat. "I am the man who loves you," he countered, his obsidian eyes locking onto hers. "I am the only man who has ever truly seen you. For 20 years, I have been your shadow. I watched you learn to code. I bought the company that gave you your first internship. I ensured that every obstacle in your path was just high enough to make you jump, but never high enough to break you. I am the architect of Isola. Why would I destroy my greatest work?" He reached out, his hand open, an invitation that felt like a death sentence. "Give me the card, Isola. Don't let Julian's ghost poison what we've built." "We've built nothing," she screamed, holding the card over the railing. "This is a cage, and I'd rather fall into the abyss than spend another second as your masterpiece." Malakor's expression darkened. The amber light in the balcony floor suddenly shifted to a violent, pulsing red. "You won't jump. The tether won't let you." "What?" "The device in your neck," Malakor said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous vibration. "It isn't just a monitor. It's a regulator. It knows your intent. If your heart rate suggests a terminal action, a leap, a self-inflicted wound, it will flood your system with a paralyzing neurotoxin. You will be a statue on this balcony before you can even climb the rail. I told you, Isola. You are irreplaceable. I will not allow you to be lost." Isola felt a surge of pure, unadulterated hatred. She looked at her hand, and sure enough, her fingers felt heavy, a dull numbness creeping up her arm. He had even stolen her right to die. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, Malakor continued, stepping into her personal space. He smelled of rain and iron. "The weaver has finished the blood tapestry. The archive is ready. Tonight, you cease to be a guest. You become the heart of the ossuary." He gripped her waist and pulled her flush against him. Isola's body felt like lead, the neurotoxin already whispering through her veins, numbing her resistance but leaving her mind hyper-aware. "Elias!" Malakor called out. The butler appeared in the doorway, followed by 4 men in white robes, the acolytes of the archive. They carried a basin of dark stone and a ceremonial blade made of obsidian. "The oath of the glass cage," Elias announced, his voice devoid of emotion. Malakor led the semi-paralyzed Isola back into the sanctum. The room had been transformed. The holographic screens were gone, replaced by a circle of candles that burned with blue flames. In the center stood the weaver's loom, but the tapestry was no longer cloth. It was a shimmering web of fiber optics and human hair. "In the old world, people exchanged rings," Malakor whispered in her ear as he guided her to the stone basin. "In the ossuary, we exchange reality. Once this oath is taken, your digital ghost will be merged with mine. Every secret I have will be yours. Every breath you take will be recorded in the eternal ledger." He took the obsidian blade and made a shallow cut across his own palm. The blood was dark, almost black in the blue firelight. He held his hand over the basin. Then he took Isola's hand. "Don't do this," she pleaded, her voice a slurred whisper. "It is already done, Isola. It was done the moment I saw you at 6 years old, standing in the ruins of your home, looking at the stars. You were mine then. You are mine now." He pressed the blade to her palm. As the cold stone bit into her skin, a sudden, sharp clarity pierced through the fog of the neurotoxin. Isola realized that the biotether worked on rhythm. It suppressed her when she was frantic. But what if she wasn't frantic? What if she was focused? As her blood dripped into the basin, mingling with his, she didn't fight the numbness. She leaned into it. She used the calm the device was forcing on her to access the back door she had hidden in the system earlier that morning. In her mind, she visualized the code of the sanctum. She wasn't just an archivist. She was a ghost in the machine. While Malakor recited the ancient words of the oath, Isola was silently screaming commands into the local network through the interface in her neck. Command: execute protocol Icarus. Target primary power core. Authorization Isola 01, the crown jewel. The sanctum's lights flickered. "With this blood, the island is claimed," Malakor intoned, his eyes fixed on hers. "With this blood, the archive is sealed." "With this blood," Isola whispered, her eyes burning with a dark fire, "the archive is deleted." A deafening alarm shrieked through the mountain. The blue candles were blown out by a sudden gust of air from the ventilation system. The floor beneath them groaned as the massive server arrays began to overheat, their cooling fans screaming like dying animals. Malakor's grip on her hand tightened. "What have you done?" "I didn't just find the origin file, Malakor," Isola said, the paralysis receding as her adrenaline spiked beyond the tether's ability to compensate. "I found the kill switch. Julian Thorne didn't just leave a message, he left a virus, and I just gave it a front door key." The holographic maps erupted into a chaotic storm of red pixels. Files, thousands of years of stolen history, the leverage Malakor used to rule the world, began to dissolve into static. The blood tapestry on the loom caught fire, the fiber optics melting into a stinking puddle of plastic. "Stop it!" Malakor roared, throwing her aside and lunging for the main console. But it was too late. The system was eating itself. The mountain fortress, once a miracle of engineering, was becoming a furnace. "Elias, get the hard links," Malakor shouted, his composure finally shattering. For the first time, he looked like a man, a desperate, obsessed man losing his toys. Isola scrambled to her feet, her hand bleeding but her spirit soaring. She ran towards the weaver's chamber. She had to find the old woman. She had to get them both out. But when she reached the room, the weaver was gone. Only the bone loom remained, glowing in the reflection of the fires spreading through the halls. A single note was pinned to the frame. "The thread has been cut, Isola. Run. The abyss is the only place he can't follow." Isola didn't hesitate. She ran back toward the balcony. Behind her, the sanctum exploded in a shower of glass and sparks. She heard Malakor's voice calling her name, a sound of pure, agonized possession. He wasn't trying to save the data anymore. He was trying to save her. "Isola, you cannot leave. You are part of me." She reached the railing. The wind was even more violent now, the mountain shaking as the internal power core began to melt down. She looked back and saw him. Malakor was emerging from the smoke, his clothes torn, his face bloodied, but his eyes still fixed on her with a terrifying, singular focus. "The tether will kill you if you jump," he screamed over the roar of the fire. "Stay, I can rebuild it. I can rebuild everything." "Then rebuild it without me," Isola said. She didn't climb the rail, she stepped onto it. Her heart was pounding at a rate that should have triggered the neurotoxin. She felt the sting in her neck, the device trying to shut her down. But Isola did something she hadn't done in 20 years. She stopped being afraid. She accepted the fall. She embraced the chaos. In that moment of total surrender, her heart rate plateaued. The tether, confused by her sudden, zen-like calm, faltered. Isola looked at Malakor one last time. She didn't see a god or a monster. She saw a man who was so afraid of being alone that he had built a mountain to hide in. "You never owned me, Malakor," she said. "You just rented the silence." She stepped off. The sensation of falling was not like drowning. It was like flying. The wind stripped away the scent of sandalwood and ash. The pressure of his world vanished. As she plummeted into the grey mist, she felt a sharp pop in her neck. The biotether pushed past its limits, short-circuited, and died. She was an island again. But as the mists swallowed her, a dark shape plummeted after her. Malakor hadn't stayed in the burning fortress. He had jumped. Even in the abyss, he was coming for her. The fall was not a clean descent into oblivion. It was a chaotic symphony of gravity and ice. Isola felt the air being ripped from her lungs as she plummeted through the cloud layer. Then, the mountain struck back. She didn't hit the ground. She hit a steep, snow-packed couloir, a natural slide of frozen powder that channeled her downward. Pain was a secondary sensation, a distant ringing in a house that was currently being demolished. She tumbled, the world a blur of white and grey, until a shelf of ancient pine trees caught her. She slammed into a thick branch, the impact snapping the wood and sending her spinning into a deep drift of snow. Silence followed. It was a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. No humming servers, no rhythmic pulse of the biotether, no voice of a god-king. Isola lay still, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Her silk dress was shredded, a ruined rag of plum-coloured fabric that offered zero protection against the sub-zero temperatures of the Atlas peaks. She reached up to her neck. The skin was scorched, a small, blackened circular burn marking where the tether had overloaded and died. The internal regulator was gone. For the first time in days, her heartbeat was her own, erratic, terrified, and flickering like a candle in a gale. She forced herself to sit up. Every bone screamed in protest. Her left arm was a dull roar of agony, likely dislocated or fractured. She looked up. High above, Through the swirling snow and the jagged teeth of the peaks, she saw a dull orange glow. The observatory was burning. The cradle of her captivity was a funeral pyre in the sky. Then she heard it, a crunch of snow, a heavy dragging sound. Isola froze. She looked toward the edge of the tree line. Out of the white haze, a figure emerged. Malakor. He looked like a fallen angel cast out of a burning heaven. His charcoal suit was torn to ribbons. His white shirt stained a deep, visceral crimson. His left leg was dragging, leaving a dark trail in the pristine snow. But it was his face that haunted her. The mask of the calm, calculating curator had been shattered. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and fixed on her with a desperate, animalistic intensity. "Isola!" he croaked. The voice that had once been a smooth baritone was now a grating rasp of blood and bile. She tried to stand, but her knees buckled. She began to crawl away, her fingers numbing as they dug into the ice. "Stay away from me." "There is nowhere to go," Malakor said, collapsing a few feet from her. He rolled onto his back, gasping at the thin air. "The storm, it's coming in. We will be buried in an hour." "Better to be buried in snow than in your archives," Isola spat, though she was shivering so violently her teeth clicked together. Malakor let out a hollow, wet laugh. He reached into his tattered jacket and pulled out a silver flask. He took a swig and held it out toward her. "Take it. It's high-altitude brandy. It won't save you, but it will stop the shivering long enough for you to think." Isola hesitated, then snatched the flask. The liquid was liquid fire, burning its way down her throat and blooming in her chest. It gave her enough strength to move into the hollow of a lightning-struck cedar tree, a small, natural shelter. Malakor dragged himself toward the same tree, propping his back against the trunk opposite her. They sat 3 feet apart, two ghosts in a frozen wasteland, stripped of the technology that had defined their god and subject relationship. "You destroyed it," Malakor whispered, staring up at the burning peak. 1,500 years of human history. The only copy of the Gospel of Mary, the private diaries of the Borgias. Gone. All because you wanted to hurt me. "I didn't do it to hurt you," Isola said, hugging her knees to her chest. "I did it to stop you. You weren't preserving history, Malakor. You were hoarding it. You were making yourself the only gateway to the truth. That's not a curator. That's a tyrant. The truth is a weapon, Isola. In the hands of the masses, it's a torch that burns everything down. Look at the world below. They delete their own lives every time they update a profile. They don't care about the past. Only I cared." "And what about my parents?" Isola's voice cracked. "Did you care about them? Or were they just noise that needed to be edited out of my story?" Malakor closed his eyes. The orange light of the distant fire reflected in the blood on his cheek. "I told you. Your father was going to sell the origin file to the Ouroboros Syndicate. They wouldn't have just killed him. They would have taken you, Isola. They would have used your mind to build a digital panopticon that would have enslaved every mind on the planet. I didn't just light the match to save the file. I lit it to save you from becoming their tool." "So you made me your tool instead," she whispered. "No," Malakor said, his voice suddenly sharp. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something that wasn't obsession. It was regret. "I made you my equal. I wanted someone who could look at the darkness with me and not blink. I wanted a witness. A witness who was also a prisoner. Is there a difference in this world?" Malakor leaned his head back against the bark. "We are all prisoners of something. Time, memory, gravity. I just gave you a cage with a better view." The wind picked up, a howling gale that threatened to rip the cedar from the earth. The temperature was dropping fast. Isola felt the lethargy of hypothermia beginning to creep into her limbs, the dangerous, sweet desire to just close her eyes and sleep. "Don't," Malakor barked, sensing her fading. "If you sleep, you die. Isola, look at me." She forced her eyes open. "Why did you jump, Malakor? You could have stayed. You had the escape pods. You had the elite guard. Why follow me into the abyss?" Malakor stared at her for a long beat. The wind roared around them, but the space between them felt strangely still. "Because the archive is gone," he said softly. "The records are ash. The gold is melted. The men who served me are dead or scattered." He reached out, his hand trembling as he touched the hem of her ruined dress. "You are the only thing left in the world that is real. You are the only file I couldn't bear to see deleted." It was the ultimate confession of the predator. He had destroyed everything he claimed to love: history, order, his empire, just to pursue the one thing he couldn't control. "You're pathetic," Isola said, but she didn't pull away. She couldn't. The cold was a physical barrier, forcing them together. "I am a man who lost his soul 20 years ago in a fire," Malakor said. "And I thought I could build a new one out of glass and stone. But a soul isn't a building, Isola. It's a pulse, and yours is the only one I can still hear." As the storm reached its crescendo, the cedar tree groaned. A massive branch, heavy with ice, snapped above them. Malakor reacted with a speed that defied his injuries. He lunged across the small gap, shielding Isola with his own body as the branch crashed down, pinning them both into the snow. The weight was immense. Isola was trapped beneath Malakor's chest. The heat of his blood soaked into her dress, a sickeningly warm contrast to the freezing snow. "Malakor," she gasped, her face pressed into his neck. "I've got you," he whispered. His breath was shallow, a rattling sound in his lungs. Stay under me. My coat, it's reinforced with carbon fibers. It will hold the heat." "You're going to bleed out," she said, her voice muffled against his skin. "Then I will finally be silent," he murmured. "And you will finally have your island." For the next few hours, the world ceased to exist. There was only the sound of the wind, the crushing weight of the branch, and the slow, fading warmth of the man who had ruined her life. Isola felt a strange, terrifying shift in her own heart. She hated him. She wanted him dead. And yet, as the cold pressed in from all sides, he was the only thing keeping her heart beating. In the dark, beneath the weight of the mountain, the lines between captor and captive, protector and monster, blurred into a single, desperate struggle for a single breath of air. Isola reached out with her one good hand and gripped the lapel of his jacket. She held on, not because she loved him, but because he was the only anchor left in a world that had been erased. "Malakor," she whispered into the dark, "don't you dare die yet. I haven't finished hating you." He didn't answer. His heart, once a rhythmic, mechanical beat she could feel through a tether, was now a slow, irregular flutter against her own ribs. Thump, thump, thump. The rhythm of the ossuary had ended. The rhythm of the storm had begun. The dawn did not break over Mount Attalus. It bled. A jagged line of bruised purple and sickly ochre spilled across the horizon, illuminating a world that had been scrubbed clean by the storm. Under the weight of the fallen cedar branch, Isola stirred. Her body was no longer a collection of limbs and senses. It was a single, throbbing ache, frozen in a rime of frost. Malakor's weight was still heavy upon her, but the heat that had sustained her through the darkest hours of the night had dissipated. He was cold, not the clinical, calculating cold of his boardroom persona, but the leaden, terrifying cold of a body shutting down. "Malakor," she whispered. Her voice was a dry rattle, lost to the whistling wind. She pushed against his chest with her one functional arm. He didn't move. His head was slumped against her shoulder, his pale skin now a translucent blue. The blood on his shirt had frozen into a dark, brittle crust. Isola felt a surge of panic that she couldn't justify. She should want him dead. She should be celebrating the silence of the man who had lit the match that consumed her childhood. But as she looked at him, she realized that if he died here, the truth died with him. She would be the last archive of a dead empire, a ghost wandering a mountain with no one to witness her vengeance or her survival. With a scream of pure, agonizing effort, Isola braced her legs against the snow and shoved. The ice-heavy branch shifted just enough for her to slide out from beneath the crushing pressure. She collapsed onto the snow, gasping, her lungs burning in the thin air. She turned back to pull him out. "Wake up, you bastard. You don't get to leave yet." She dragged him by the shoulders, his dead weight nearly snapping her remaining strength. As his body cleared the shadow of the cedar, the morning light hit his face. His eyelids fluttered. A thin, red thread of life still held him to the world. "Isola!" he wheezed, his obsidian eyes opening a sliver. They were unfocused, the predatory fire replaced by a hollow, haunting emptiness. "Don't speak," she commanded, her hands trembling as she searched his tattered jacket. She found the silver flask, empty now, and a small, high-frequency radio. It was shattered, a useless piece of plastic and wire. She looked up at the peak. The observatory was a blackened tooth against the sky, still smouldering. And that's when she saw them. Far above, tracing the ridgeline like a row of predatory birds, were 4 black silhouettes. They weren't moving with the frantic energy of a rescue team. They were moving with tactical precision, their shadows long and sharp against the snow. They carried long-range rifles, and their gear reflected the sun with a dull, matte finish. "Vultures," Malakor whispered, his gaze following hers. He coughed, a spray of crimson staining the white snow. "Ouroboros, they aren't here for the ruins. They're here for us," Isola realized. Malakor reached out, his fingers catching her wrist with a strength that surprised her. "They don't want the archives, Isola. They want the keys, my biometric signatures, and your mind. To them, you are the only processor left that can unencrypt the global shadow bank. If they take you, the world, it becomes a slaughterhouse." "I'm not going with them," she said, her jaw tightening. "Then you have to—" "Finish it," Malakor said. He fumbled with his right cufflink, a heavy piece of onyx. He twisted it, and a small, crystalline vial slid out. "The kill switch. Not for the system. For me. If I die, my biometric pulse stops. The servers in the deep vault will self-destruct. They will have nothing." He held the vial toward her. It was a fast-acting neurotoxin, a final mercy for the king who had lost his kingdom. Isola looked at the vial, then at the silhouettes descending the mountain. The choice was absolute. She could kill the man who ruined her life, take her chances with the storm, or let the syndicate turn her into a living slave for their digital empire. "Give me your hand," she said. Malakor closed his eyes, a ghost of a smile touching his blue lips. "Do it, Isola. Be the island. One last time." She didn't take the vial. Instead, she took his hand and began to wrap it in a strip of silk torn from her dress. "I'm not killing you," she hissed. "And I'm not letting them have you. You owe me 20 years of a life, Malakor. You're going to pay it back one breath at a time." She stood up, ignoring the scream of her fractured arm. She couldn't carry him, but she could slide him. She grabbed the carbon fiber coat he wore, the one that had saved her life, and used it as a makeshift sled. "If we stay here, we're targets," she muttered. "The tree line. There's a ravine a mile down. If we can get into the shadows, their thermal scanners will struggle with the rock density." For the next 2 hours, Isola became a creature of pure, unadulterated will. She dragged Malakor through the waist-deep snow, her heart hammering against her ribs with a rhythm that was no longer regulated by anyone but herself. She was the architect now. She was the curator of their survival. The Ouroboros team was closing in. She could hear the occasional crunch of a snowmobile engine echoing off the granite walls. They were hunting, circling, waiting for the two irreplaceable assets to collapse from exhaustion. "Isola, leave me," Malakor groaned as they reached the edge of the ravine. "You're slowing down." "Shut up," she panted, her vision blurring. She reached the lip of the ravine. It was a steep drop, filled with loose shale and frozen brush. It was a gamble, a desperate, suicidal slide into the dark. "Hold on," she whispered. She threw herself backward, pulling Malakor with her. They tumbled. The world became a kaleidoscope of grey rock and biting cold. Isola felt her shoulder pop back into place with a sickening crunch as they hit a snowbank at the bottom. She screamed into the silence, the pain white-hot and blinding. They lay at the bottom of the ravine, hidden by a natural overhang of granite. Above them, the sound of snowmobiles grew louder, then paused directly over their heads. Isola held her breath. She pressed her hand over Malakor's mouth, her eyes fixed on the rim of the ravine. A shadow appeared. A soldier in black tactical gear peered over the edge. He held a thermal scanner, sweeping it back and forth. Isola felt Malakor's heart beating against her back. Thump, 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 thump. It was slow, dangerously slow, but it was there. She closed her eyes and prayed to a god she hadn't spoken to since the fire. "Make us part of the mountain. Make us stone." The soldier paused. He spoke into a comms unit. "Negative. Just a debris slide. Moving to Sector 4. The engines roared to life and faded into the distance. Isola let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 20 years. She slumped against the rock, her body finally giving in to the cold. She looked at Malakor. He was unconscious again, his face a mask of porcelain. She reached out and touched the burn mark on her neck. It was a scar now, a reminder of the man who tried to own her rhythm. She realized then that the origin file Julian Thorne had mentioned wasn't just about the fire. It was about the cycle. Malakor hadn't just watched her. He had been shaped by her. He had destroyed her world because he was terrified that she would grow up to be better than him, that she would find a way to preserve the world without the need for a cage. He didn't love her. He feared her. And now, as she sat in the dark of a mountain ravine, holding the life of her captor in her hands, she realized she had the ultimate power. She didn't need to kill him to win. She just had to survive him. "You wanted a witness, Malakor," she whispered, her voice finally steady. "Well, look at me. I'm the only thing left of your empire, and I'm going to make sure the world knows exactly who lit the match." She pulled the carbon fiber coat tighter around both of them. The sun was climbing higher now, the gold light finally reaching the bottom of the ravine. It wasn't the blue light of the sanctum or the amber light of the observatory. It was the messy, unpredictable light of a world that didn't belong to anyone. Isola closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to plan. She was an archivist. She knew how to rebuild from ruins. And as she listened to the wind howling through the peaks, she began to stitch together a new story, one where the island didn't just survive the sea, but learned how to command the waves. The shepherd's hut was less of a shelter and more of a stone grave, long forgotten by the living. Tucked into the jagged armpit of a granite cliff at the base of the ravine, its walls were made of dry stacked schist, thick enough to muffle the screaming winds, but thin enough to let the freezing dampness seep through like a slow poison. Inside, the air smelled of wet wool, ancient soot, and the metallic tang of fresh blood. Isola dragged Malakor through the narrow threshold, the carbon fibre coat sliding over the dirt floor, with a sound like a dying breath. She was beyond exhaustion. She had entered a state of crystalline clarity that only comes when the body has accepted its own end. Her fractured arm was strapped to her chest with a length of plum-coloured silk, and her fingers were raw, the nails torn from clawing through the shale. She collapsed beside him, her lungs burning. For a long time, the only sound was the rhythmic whistle of the wind through the cracks in the stone. "Wake up," she whispered, her voice a ghost of its former self. "I didn't drag you across a mountain just to watch you turn into a statue." Malakor did not respond. His face was a mask of grey marble, his lips a bruised violet. If not for the faint, irregular shudder of his chest, he would have been part of the stones. Isola reached into the hidden pocket of his jacket, finding a small emergency kit she had spotted earlier. Inside were 3 vials of adrenaline, a suture kit, and a thermal blanket the size of a deck of cards. She looked at the adrenaline. She looked at him. "You told me once that everything is an object, Malakor," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and fatigue. "Right now, you're just a broken machine, and I'm the only one who knows how to fix the code." She jammed the needle into his thigh. The effect was instantaneous. Malakor's body convulsed, his back arching off the dirt floor. A jagged, guttural gasp tore from his throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated life returning to a place that had already invited the dark. His eyes snapped open, obsidian and wild, focusing on the thatched roof above before settling on Isola. "The syndicate?" he wheezed, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. "Gone, for now," Isola said, her voice flat. "But you're bleeding out. Hold still." For the next hour, the roles were entirely reversed. The crown jewel of the ossuary became the surgeon. Isola used the blue flame of a small chemical heater from the kit to sterilize the needle. She stripped the ruined shirt from his chest, revealing a landscape of old scars and fresh trauma. A deep shrapnel wound from the explosion in the sanctum had sliced through his side, narrowly missing the lung. As she pulled the thread through his skin, Malakor didn't scream. He watched her. His gaze was no longer the heavy, proprietary stare of a master. It was the hollow, searching look of a man who had seen the bottom of the abyss and realized it was empty. "Why?" he asked, his voice a low vibration that made the nodule burn on her neck ache. "You had the vial. You had the chance to walk away." "Because you owe me," she said, pulling a stitch tight. "You spent 20 years writing my story, Malakor. You don't get to die until I read the final chapter. I found the SD card. I know about the fire. But the Weaver said something else. She said you didn't just watch me. She said you needed me." Malakor leaned his head back against the stone wall, a grimace of pain flickering across his features. The Weaver was always too fond of the dramatic. She sees the threads, but she forgets the loom. "Don't lie to me. Not here. Not when I'm the only thing keeping your heart beating." Isola sat back, her hands stained with his blood. "The origin file. Julian Thorne said it contained the secret of my bloodline. Why was my father selling files on me when I was 6 years old? Why did Ouroboros want a child?" Malakor's eyes clouded, the firelight reflecting in them like distant explosions. "Your father wasn't selling files on you, Isola. He was selling you. Or rather, what you represented. He took a shallow, painful breath. The ossuary was founded on the idea that human genius is a biological resource. My ancestors believed that certain lineages, very few, very rare, possessed a neural architecture that could bridge the gap between human intuition and machine logic. A living processor. Your father was a minor archivist who realized his daughter was the pinnacle of that lineage. He didn't want to protect you. He wanted to auction you. Isola felt the world tilt. The fire that had haunted her dreams, the image of her father reaching for her through the smoke, suddenly took on a more sinister hue. "You didn't burn the house to save the files," she whispered, the realization dawning with the coldness of the mountain. "You burned it to stop the auction." "I was 22, Malakor said, his voice regaining some of its resonance. "A soldier for the previous curator. I was sent to retrieve the files. When I arrived, the syndicate was already there. Your father was handing you over to Marcus Thorne's father. I didn't have a choice. If I had tried to fight them all, they would have taken you. So, I removed the variables." "You killed my parents to save me for yourself," Isola spat. "You've been grooming me since I was 6 years old to be your perfect machine." "I groomed you to survive," Malakor roared, the effort causing blood to seep through his fresh stitches. "I gave you the penthouse, the education, the career. I created a world where you could hone your gift without being torn apart by the vultures. I became the monster so you could remain the angel. And the biotether, the isolation, the erasure of my identity. A necessity," he whispered, his strength flagging. "The closer you got to the truth, the more dangerous you became. Ouroboros never stopped looking for the lost heiress. I had to hide you in plain sight. I had to make you mine so the world couldn't make you theirs." Isola stood up, pacing the tiny hut. The rage was a physical pressure in her chest. Everything she thought she knew was a hall of mirrors. Her father was a traitor, her captor was a self-appointed savior, and she was nothing more than a biological asset in a war that had started before she was born. "You're no better than them," she said, turning to him. "You just have better taste in cages." "Perhaps," Malakor said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the micro SD card, the one Isola thought she had lost in the fall. He must have swiped it from her while she was unconscious. "Give it to me," she demanded. "This card doesn't just have the record of the fire," Malakor said, holding it between two fingers. "It has the decryption key for the origin file, the one Julian Thorne died trying to hide. It contains the locations of the other islands, the other children they are currently raising in cages across the globe. Ouroboros isn't just one company, Isola. It's a network, and they are all waiting for their processors." He held the card toward her. "If you take this, you aren't just an archivist anymore. You are a target. You're the only one who can shut them down, or the only one who can lead them to the harvest. This is the truth you wanted. Is it worth the wait?" Isola looked at the small piece of plastic. It was the key to her past, but also the blueprint for a war she never asked to fight. She looked at Malakor. He was offering her the choice he had denied her for 20 years. "Why give it to me now?" she asked. "Why not just keep it and keep me?" "Because the observatory is gone," Malakor said, a genuine shadow of grief crossing his face. "The glass is broken. I can no longer protect you from yourself. You chose the abyss, Isola. And in the abyss, there are no masters, only those who can see in the dark." Isola stepped forward and took the card. As her fingers brushed his, a spark of the old, terrifying electricity jumped between them. For a second, the power dynamic wavered, the lines of hatred and dependence blurring into something nameless and raw. Suddenly, a red laser dot danced across the stone wall of the hut. Isola froze. "Down!" Malakor hissed, lunging for her and pinning her to the floor. just as a high-velocity round shattered the schist blocks where her head had been a second before. The silence of the mountain was shattered by the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of a low-flying helicopter. The syndicate had found the thermal signature of the chemical heater. "They're here!" Isola panted, her heart slamming against her ribs. Malakor looked at her, his obsidian eyes burning with a final, desperate resolve. The ravine leads to a series of lava tubes. They're too narrow for their drones. If you go now, you can make it to the base of the valley before they can redirect their ground teams. "And you?" Malakor looked at his leg, then at the blood-soaked dirt. "I will provide the distraction. My biometric pulse is still tied to the secondary fail-safes in the deep vault. If they see me moving, they will focus their fire on me to keep the asset intact. You have the card, you have the mind. Go." Isola looked at the door, then back at him. This was the moment she had prayed for, the chance to leave him behind, to let the mountain or the syndicate finish what she had started. He was the man who burned her world. He was the man who stole her breath. "I hate you," she whispered. "I know," Malakor said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "It's the most honest thing you've ever given me." He handed her the obsidian blade he had used during the blood oath. "Don't let them take you alive, Isola. You are too beautiful to be a machine." Isola didn't say goodbye. She couldn't. She turned and crawled through a small opening in the back of the hut that led into the dark, jagged entrance of the lava tubes. As she disappeared into the earth, she heard the sound of Malakor dragging himself towards the front door. She heard him shouting, his voice a defiant roar against the screaming turbines of the helicopter. Thump, 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 thump. The rhythm was hers now. She ran into the darkness, the micro SD card clutched in her hand like a talisman. The tunnel was cold, wet, and smelled of the beginning of the world. She didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. She was Isola, the island, and the ocean was rising. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of drowning. She was learning how to become the storm. Behind her, the sound of gunfire erupted, echoing through the stone veins of the mountain. One man's obsession was ending. One woman's war was beginning. The lava tubes were not merely tunnels. They were the digestive tract of the mountain, a series of ribbed basaltic veins that felt as though they were constricting around Isola with every step she took. The darkness here was absolute, a heavy, suffocating velvet that seemed to swallow the light of the small chemical torch she had pilfered from Malakor's kit. Every few hundred yards the earth would groan, a deep, tectonic rumble that reminded her she was moving through a tomb that had existed long before. The ossuary had carved its glass eyes into the summit. Her fractured arm was a constant, throbbing reminder of her humanity. Every time her shoulder brushed against the rough, volcanic stone, white-hot needles of agony shot through her nervous system. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Behind her, the muffled thud of high-caliber rounds and the screech of helicopter turbines grew fainter, replaced by the rhythmic drip of mineral-rich water. Thump, 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 thump. The rhythm was no longer a mechanical mandate from a nodule in her neck. It was her own. It was the sound of a woman who had been erased and was now frantically redrawing her own borders. After what felt like a lifetime of crawling through the bowels of the earth, the air changed. The smell of sulfur and damp stone was replaced by a sharp, metallic tang, the scent of civilization. Isola emerged from a drainage grate located in the shadow of a massive hydroelectric dam at the foot of the Atlas Range. Below her, the city of Atlas sprawled like a glowing neon fungus. It was a place of high-rises and low lives, a technocratic sprawl where the syndicate's influence was felt in every flickering street lamp and every encrypted transaction. To the world, she was still dead. To Malakor, she was a fugitive. To Ouroboros, she was a harvest waiting to be reaped. Isola stumbled toward the outskirts, her shredded plum-colored silk dress attracting the wary stares of late-night commuters and street vendors. She looked like a ghost that had climbed out of a shipwreck. She needed a new skin. She needed to disappear into the noise. She found what she was looking for in a net crawl, a subterranean district where the city's discarded technology was sold in heaps. In a cramped, windowless stall that smelled of ozone and cheap tobacco, she traded the obsidian blade Malakor had given her for a nondescript hoodie, a pair of rugged trousers, and a burner deck, a high-end, untraceable portable computer with a neural link interface. The merchant, a man with cybernetic eyes that flickered with a perpetual amber glow, didn't ask questions. In the digital underworld, questions were a luxury no one could afford. "The blade is ancient," the merchant rasped, weighing the obsidian in his hand. "Where does a girl like you find something that tastes of the ossuary?" "In a museum that burned down," Isola replied, her voice cold. She took the burner deck and vanished into the crowd before he could reply. She found a room in a capsule hotel, a coffin-sized space that offered nothing but a hard mattress and a high-speed fiber optic port. It was the perfect fortress for a digital phantom. Isola sat cross-legged in the cramped space, the glow of the burner deck illuminating the sharp angles of her face. She felt the weight of the micro SD card in her palm. This was the origin file. This was the truth that had cost Julian Thorne his life and Malakor his empire. She inserted the card. The interface didn't welcome her with the sleek, curated aesthetics of Malakor's sanctum. It was a raw, DOS-style prompt, the text scrolling in a frantic, unpolished green. Authentication required. Lineage. Key detected. Accessing origin root success. Isola's breath caught. The file began to decompress, unleashing a flood of data that made her neural link hum with a dizzying intensity. It wasn't just records, it was a map. The file was titled The Orchard. It was a global ledger of children, the islands. She saw names, birth dates, and genetic markers. She saw her own name at the top of the list, labeled as Subject Alpha, the first success. But below her were dozens of others. Subject Delta, Tokyo. Location, the Aetherius Institute. Subject, Gamma, Berlin. Location, Black Forest Sanatorium. Subject, Epsilon, Sao Paulo. Location, Favela Grid 09. These were the children Malakor had mentioned, the living processors being raised in invisible cages. They were the future Ouroboros intended to build, a world where human intuition was harvested like electricity to power a global shadow state. Isola scrolled down to Subject Delta. A photograph appeared. A young boy no older than 8, with wide, hauntingly familiar eyes. His name was Kenji. According to the notes, he was currently undergoing Phase 4 integration. Integration. Isola knew what that meant. It meant they were about to install a biotether. It meant they were about to erase his rhythm and replace it with their own. "Not again," Isola whispered, her fingers flying across the keys. "I won't let it happen again." As she dug deeper into the file, she found a subdirectory labeled Malakor_observation_logs. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to delete it, to erase the man from her mind as thoroughly as he had erased her from the world. But she had to know. She opened the latest entry, dated only 48 hours ago. Malakor's voice filled her earpiece, but it wasn't the voice of the predator she had fought on the mountain. It was a man speaking to himself in the silence of a dying world. She thinks I am her enemy, the recording began. And perhaps I am. I have stolen her years to give her a future she cannot yet comprehend. The syndicate moves closer every hour. They do not want her mind, they want the bridge she has become. If I fall, she will believe she is free. But freedom is a vacuum, and Ouroboros hates a void. She will realize that I was not her cage, I was her camouflage. I hope she remembers how to hide. Isola closed the file, a cold stone of conflicting emotions settling in her stomach. Malakor had saved her from the auction, but he had done it by buying her himself. He had protected her from the storm by building a prison around her. Suddenly, a notification flashed on her screen. Remote connection attempt, source unknown. Encryption type, ossuary, private, v3. Isola's heart skipped. Ossuary, private. The only people who knew that protocol were Julian Thorne, the Weaver, and... She accepted the connection. A text prompt appeared. Isola, the mountain has eyes. Who is this? She typed back, her hands trembling. A friend of Julian. The Weaver sends her regards. She has moved to the Berlin grid. Malakor is not dead, Isola, but he is no longer in control. Isola felt a surge of adrenaline, not dead. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, it felt like a tether of its own. He was still out there, a wounded wolf in the dark. The Syndicate has taken Kenji to the Tokyo hub. The integration is scheduled for 6 a.m. tomorrow. If you want to stop the orchard, you start with the boy. The archive must become a shield. How do I get to Tokyo? Isola typed. I have no money, no identity, and half the world is looking for me. Check the locker at the Central Maglev station. Code, June 5th, 2006. The date the fire started. Malakor kept an exit strategy for you, Isola. Even at the end, he anticipated your rebellion. The connection severed. Isola sat in the dark of the capsule hotel, the blue light of the screen reflecting in her eyes. Malakor had provided the means for her escape. It was the ultimate psychological move. He had predicted her defiance so perfectly that he had budgeted for it. He was still managing her, even from the ruins of his empire. She grabbed her gear and left the hotel, weaving through the neon-drenched streets of Attalus. The Maglev station was a cathedral of chrome and glass, teeming with travelers and security drones. She moved like a shadow, her hood pulled low, her mind analyzing the patrol patterns of the Syndicate's peacekeepers. She found the locker. Her fingers hesitated over the keypad. June 5th, 2006. The day her parents died, the day her life was pruned. She entered the code. The locker hissed open. Inside was a high-grade courier bag. She opened it to find a stack of untraceable credits, a biometric-altering mask that used microcurrents to shift the wearer's facial structure, and a passport in the name of Celia Thorne. Celia, the name of Julian's sister who had died years ago. And at the bottom of the bag was a single, handwritten note on heavy parchment. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, authoritative, and cold. The island must learn to navigate. The sea is waiting. M. Isola gripped the note, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. He was still there, in her head, in her pockets, in her very identity. But as she looked at the passport, she realized something. He hadn't given her these tools so she could run back to him. He had given them to her so she could finish what he couldn't. He was using her to destroy the syndicate that had betrayed him. He was turning his masterpiece into a weapon. Fine, Isola whispered to the empty station. I'll play your game one last time, Malakor. But when I'm done, I'm coming for the architect. She donned the biometric mask, feeling the strange, tingling sensation as her cheekbones shifted and her jawline softened. She looked in the reflection of the locker. Isola was gone. Celia Thorne was born. She walked toward the maglev platform, her ticket for Tokyo already stored in her burner deck. As the train accelerated, the city of Atalas became a blur of lights, a fading memory of the mountain that had held her. Isola sat by the window, the micro-SD card safely tucked into a hidden compartment in her new jacket. She opened the orchard file once more, looking at the faces of the children. They were scattered across the globe, each one a node in a network of exploited genius. She was the first, the alpha, and she had been the only one to break the glass. She began to code. She didn't have a sanctum anymore, but she had the origin root. She began to write a counter-virus, not a destructive one, but a cloaking agent. If she could reach the other children, if she could upload this agent into their biotethers, she could make them invisible to the syndicate. She could turn the orchard into a forest of ghosts. But she knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed the Weaver. She needed the Julian Thorne legacy. And she needed to know the truth about the man who was currently bleeding out on a mountain peak or being interrogated in a syndicate black site. The train entered a tunnel, and for a moment, the window became a mirror. Isola looked at herself, at the new face, the hard eyes, the steady hands. The girl who had been an island was dead. The girl who had been a prisoner was gone. In her place was something Malakor had never intended to create. He wanted an archive. He wanted a goddess. Instead, he had created a hunter. As the maglev reached its cruising speed of 500 kilometers per hour, Isola felt the familiar vibration in her neck, the phantom limb of the biotether. She reached up and touched the scar. It didn't pulse anymore, it was silent. She was free. And freedom, she realized, was far more terrifying than the cage. In the cage, there were rules. In the cage, there was a master who, in his own twisted way, ensured her survival. Out here, in the static of the world, there was only the hunt. "I'm coming, Kenji," she whispered as the lights of the Tokyo outskirts began to appear on the horizon. "I'm coming to break the glass." Behind her, in the dark of the train car, a man in a charcoal suit lowered his newspaper. He watched the back of her head with a gaze that was both proprietary and mournful. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply watched the island move across the sea, waiting for the moment the waves would finally bring her back to the shore. The cycle of the ossuary was not over. It had simply moved to a larger stage. Tokyo did not sleep. It vibrated. To Isola, the city felt like a massive, organic circuit board, crackling with the electricity of 20 million souls. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, rain-slicked asphalt, and the sweet, artificial aroma of strawberry-flavored vapor from the vending machines that lined every alleyway. Above, the sky was invisible, replaced by a canopy of holographic advertisements that bathed the streets in a perpetual, flickering glow of cyan and magenta. She moved through the Shinjuku district like a ghost in the machine. The biometric mask felt like a second skin now, a subtle, constant hum against her cheekbones that reminded her she was no longer Isola of the mountain. She was Celia Thorne, a woman with a history, a bank account, and a purpose. The Aetherius Institute sat at the heart of the Minato ward, a monolith of white glass and brushed steel that looked more like a temple than a research facility. It was the crown jewel of the Ouroboros Syndicate's Asian operations, and somewhere within its sterile depths, a boy named Kenji was being prepared for a life of digital servitude. But the Aetherius was a fortress. Its security wasn't just physical, it was biometric. To enter, one needed more than a stolen badge. One needed a digital signature, a pulse key held only by the upper echelon of the Institute's medical board. Isola stood under the eaves of a noodle shop, watching the rain cascade off the neon signs. Her burner deck buzzed in her pocket. The friend of Julian had sent her a final coordinate before going dark. Location, the silent cage. Basement level, Roppongi. Target, Dr. Hideki Sato. He is a debtor. He is weak. Take his pulse. The silent cage was a gambling den that didn't exist on any map. It was located 3 levels beneath a legitimate pachinko parlor, accessible only through a service elevator that required a specific sequence of floor buttons. As the elevator doors slid open, Isola was hit by a wall of silence. Unlike the chaotic roar of the city above, the cage was unnervingly quiet. Men and women in bespoke suits sat around tables of polished obsidian, their eyes fixed on hovering holographic displays. This wasn't a place for cards or dice. This was a memory den. In the digital age where everything could be recorded and archived, the only thing left of value was raw, unadulterated human memory. The gamblers here didn't bet money. They bet their own recollections. A first kiss, the secret of a corporate merger, the face of a dead mother. The house took the data, and the winner walked away with the neural wealth of the loser. Isola scanned the room. She found Dr. Sato at a high-stakes table in the corner. He looked like a man who had already lost everything but his skin. His lab coat was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and his eyes were bloodshot, staring at a floating 3D puzzle that shifted and morphed with every second. The game was The Labyrinth of Mnemosyne. It was a neural interface challenge where players had to navigate a shifting maze using only their short-term memory. If you hit a dead end, the system wiped a segment of your past to pay the house. Isola approached the table. The dealer, a woman with silver-plated skin and no eyes, tilted her head. "The buy-in is a decade," the dealer rasped. "What 10 years are you willing to lose, little bird?" Isola looked at Sato. The doctor was sweating. He was playing for his pulse key, the biometric authorization that kept him employed at Etherius. If he lost it, he was dead. If he won, he could clear his debts to the syndicate. "I don't have a decade," Isola said, her voice steady. "But I have a map of a place that burned down, a place called the ossuary." The room went cold. The gamblers at the neighboring tables paused. The ossuary was a myth, a legend of the old world. To have a memory of its internal layout was worth more than a century of ordinary life. Dr. Sato looked up, his eyes wide. You were there?" "I was the archive," Isola said, sitting across from him. The dealer touched the table and 2 neural links slid out of the obsidian surface. Isola took one and pressed it to her temple. The world dissolved. The labyrinth wasn't a visual maze, it was an emotional one. To win, you had to move through gates that were keyed to specific sensory inputs. Gate 1, the smell of burning paper. Isola moved through it effortlessly. Her mind was a library of fire. Gate 2, the sound of a heartbeat through a biotether. Sato faltered here. He lived in the world of machines. He had forgotten the raw rhythm of the human heart. Isola surged ahead, her thoughts forming a path of pure, cold logic. Gate 3. The feeling of ice against bare skin. Isola felt the mountain again. She felt the weight of Malakor's body, the crushing branch, the fear of the abyss. But she didn't let the emotion overwhelm her. She used the pain as a compass. In the labyrinth, pain was a landmark. Sato was screaming now, a silent, internal scream that manifested as a flickering in the holographic maze. He was losing his childhood. He was losing the memory of his wedding day. The house was feeding on him. "Stop," Isola projected into the neural link. "I don't want your memories, Doctor. I just want the key." I can't let go," Sato's voice echoed in the digital void. "If I lose the key, the Syndicate will erase me." "They are already erasing you," Isola countered. "Every time you place a bet, you become less of a man and more of a ghost. Give me the authorization. I'll win the game for both of us. The house gets my memory of the fire, the most valuable thing in this room, and you walk away with your mind intact." "Why?" Sato asked. "Why save me?" "Because you're going to help me save a boy named Kenji." The hesitation in the neural link was brief. Sato was a man drowning in his own mistakes. He grabbed the lifeline. He transferred the pulse key data to Isola's burner deck within the interface. With the key in her possession, Isola didn't just navigate the labyrinth, she rewrote it. She fed the house the memory of the ossuary's burning sanctum. She gave them the sight of the gold melting, the smell of the ancient scrolls turning to ash, the feeling of the glass floor shattering. It was a feast of trauma so rich, the system shuddered. Winner Thornsey. The world snapped back into focus. Isola pulled the link from her head, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The room was silent. Dr. Sato sat slumped in his chair, weeping with relief. He still remembered his name. He still remembered his life. "The key is yours," Sato whispered, his voice trembling. "But you'll never get past the level 4 scanners. They don't just check the pulse, they check the intent. The AI at Aetherius, it can smell fear." "Then I'll just have to give it something else to look at," Isola said. She stood up and walked toward the elevator. She had the key. She had the disguise. Now she just needed a distraction. Isola returned to the neon rain of Tokyo. She didn't head back to the capsule hotel. Instead, she went to a crowded cyber cafe in Akihabara. She sat in a corner booth, the glow of the screens reflecting in her biometric mask. She opened the burner deck and accessed the Orchard file. She looked at Kenji's profile. Subject Delta, high-level neural plasticity, capable of processing 400 terabytes of raw data per second through intuitive leaps. "They aren't just using you for data, Kenji," Isola whispered. "They're using you for a conscience. They're building a machine that can feel, so it can be more efficient at being cold." She began to upload the cloaking agent she had written on the train. But she didn't send it to Kenji's tether. Not yet. She sent it to the Aetherius Institute's main cooling system. If she couldn't sneak in, she would make the Institute scream. At 0400 hours, the Aetherius Institute was a tomb of white light. Isola approached the main service entrance dressed in a stolen lab technician's uniform she had acquired from a locker at the Maglev station. She held a tray of neural feed canisters, the liquid nutrient used to sustain the processors. She reached the biometric scanner. "State your purpose," a smooth, synthetic voice echoed from the wall. Isola didn't speak. She pressed her hand to the plate. The pulse key she had won from Sato hummed through her burner deck, mimicking the doctor's unique circulatory rhythm. "Authorization. Granted. Dr. Sato, welcome back." The heavy titanium doors slid open. Inside, the Institute smelled of peppermint and ozone. It was a clinical, soulless beauty that reminded her far too much of the observatory. She moved through the corridors, her eyes scanning for the level 4 elevator. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A low, vibrating alarm began to hum through the floorboards. "Warning. Cooling system failure in Sector 7. Emergency protocols initiated." The distraction had begun. In a few minutes, the servers would start to overheat, and the security AI would be forced to divert 80% of its processing power to prevent a meltdown. It was the fever Isola had programmed. She reached the elevator. She used the key again. The doors opened and she descended into the heart of the orchard. Level 4 was different. It wasn't a lab, it was a garden. A massive circular room filled with hydroponic trees and soft, ambient bird sounds. But the trees weren't real. Their leaves were solar collectors and their trunks were encased in glass, housing the delicate neural arrays of the children. In the center of the room, sitting on a simple wooden bench, was a boy. He was small, wearing a white linen suit that looked too big for his frail frame. A silver wire ran from the base of his skull into the trunk of the tree behind him. He was staring at a holographic butterfly that danced between his fingers. "Kenji," Isola whispered. The boy didn't look up. "The butterfly is a lie," he said, his voice soft and devoid of inflection. "It has no weight. It has no smell. Why do they want me to play with things that aren't real?" Isola walked toward him, her heart breaking. She saw the integration nodule at the base of his neck. It was identical to the one she had carried for 20 years. It was still dormant, a silver parasite waiting for the 0600 command to wake up and devour his identity. "My name is Isola," she said, kneeling in front of him. "And I'm here to tell you that the world outside is real. It's cold and it's loud and it smells like rain. And I'm going to take you there." Kenji finally looked at her. His eyes weren't the eyes of a child. They were the eyes of a galaxy. The men in the black suits said, "I am a bridge." They said if I leave, the bridge collapses. "Let it collapse," Isola said, reaching out to touch his hand. "The world doesn't need a bridge built on the backs of children. It needs people who can walk on the ground." "The master won't like it," Kenji said. "The master is gone," Isola lied. She pulled a small, high-frequency pulse emitter from her bag, a tool she had designed using the origin root data. She placed it against the silver wire. "This is going to feel like a dream," she said. "A dream of a mountain." She activated the pulse. The silver wire glowed for a second, then went dull. The holographic butterfly flickered and vanished. Kenji gasped, his body sagging as the neural load was suddenly severed. I can hear my own head," he whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. "That's your voice, Kenji. Don't ever let them take it again." Isola picked him up. He was light, almost weightless. She began to head back toward the elevator, but the doors didn't open. The light shifted from white to a deep, visceral red. "Security breach. Subject Delta disconnected. Lockdown initiated. Lethal force authorized." "Isola," Kenji whispered, clinging to her neck. "The shadows are coming." The far wall of the garden slid open, and 4 vulture drones, sleek black discs with underside turrets, floated into the room. Behind them came a man in a charcoal suit. It wasn't Malakor. It was a man she recognized from the origin file. Marcus Thorne, the head of the Ouroboros Syndicate, the man her father had tried to sell her to 20 years ago. "You have a habit of ruining perfect systems, Isola," Thorne said, his voice a smooth, cultured purr. "First the observatory, now my orchard. Did you really think you could walk into my house and steal my property?" "He's not property," Isola said, her hand reaching for the obsidian shard she had hidden in her sleeve, a spare she had kept for the end. "In this world, everything is property," Thorne said, gesturing to the drones. "The air you breathe, the memories you just sold at the cage, even the face you're wearing. It all belongs to the network. Give me the boy, and I might let you live as a legacy asset. I might even let you see Malakor again." "Where is he?" Isola demanded. Thorne smiled. It was a cold, empty thing. "He's in a place where curators go when they fail, a place of perfect silence. He's watching you, Isola. He's always watching. The drones lowered their turrets. Isola looked at Kenji. She looked at the glass trees. She realized she couldn't fight her way out. She had to do what she did best. She had to rewrite the archive. "You want the bridge, Thorn?" Isola said, her voice echoing in the garden. "Then take the whole architecture." She slammed her burner deck into the interface of the central tree. "What are you doing?" Thorn barked. "I'm uploading the ossuary," Isola said. "Every memory, every file, every second of the 20 years I spent in that cage. It's all here. It's a tidal wave of data, Thorn. Your system wasn't built for the weight of a human life." The screens in the room began to flash with images. Isola's childhood, the fire, Malakor's face, the mountain, the blood in the snow. It was a sensory overload, a digital ghost story being told at the speed of light. The drones began to wobble, their sensors overwhelmed by the chaotic data dump. The AI of the Aetherius Institute began to scream, a literal, high-pitched mechanical shriek that vibrated the glass. "Shut down!" Thorn screamed at his guards. "Cut the power!" "Too late," Isola whispered. In the chaos, the elevator doors groaned and opened, overridden by the system failure. Isola didn't wait. She ran. She sprinted through the flickering corridors, the sounds of the Institute's destruction behind her. She reached the service entrance just as the secondary fail-safes kicked in, locking the doors behind her with a final, heavy thud. She was outside. The Tokyo rain hit her face, cold and beautiful. She didn't stop running until she reached the labyrinthine alleys of Roppongi. She found a small, abandoned shrine tucked between two high-rises. She sat on the stone steps, Kenji still clutched in her arms. The boy was looking up at the sky. "The rain. It has a smell," he said, reaching out to catch a drop. "It smells like everything." Isola let out a breath, her body finally beginning to shake. She had saved him. She had broken the second glass. But as she looked at her burner deck, she saw a single message on the screen. It was an encrypted file sent during the data dump. It was a video feed. She opened it. The camera was grainy, high angle. It showed a small, white room. No windows, no furniture, just a man sitting on the floor. It was Malakor. He was alive. He was wearing a white jumpsuit, his hands shackled. He looked into the camera, and for a second it felt like he was looking directly at her, across the miles, across the digital divide. He didn't speak. He just tapped his finger against his knee in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Thump, thump, thump. The rhythm of the ossuary. The message was clear. He was waiting. He had let himself be caught so she would have a reason to keep fighting. He was still the curator, and she was still his most precious file. Isola closed the deck. She looked at Kenji, who was now asleep, exhausted by the weight of his own soul. She wasn't just a fugitive anymore, she was a revolutionary. She had the origin file, she had the boy, and now she had a target. "We're going to Berlin, Kenji," she whispered into the rain. "We're going to find the others. And then we're going to burn the house down." The neon lights of Tokyo reflected in the puddles at her feet, a kaleidoscope of a world that was no longer a cage. The ocean was rising, and for the first time, Isola was the one controlling the tide. The air inside the Black Forest Sanatorium did not taste of the mountains. It tasted of clinical sterility, ionized oxygen, and the cold, metallic scent of impending finality. Isola stood in the center of the sub-vault, her feet planted firmly on the brushed steel floor. The red emergency strobes painted the walls in rhythmic flashes of crimson, mimicking the heartbeat of a dying god. Beside her, Kenji and Sophia stood like small, porcelain sentinels. Their hands were linked, forming a circuit of raw, untapped potential. Elias lay slumped against the reinforced door, his mechanical eye flickering with the last remnants of its power, a dying star in a sea of shadow. "The core is stabilizing," Sophia whispered, her silver eyes reflecting the swirling data streams that projected from the central pillar. "They are trying to lock the gates, Isola. They are trying to turn our thoughts into static." Isola looked at the silver locket clutched in her hand. The holographic interface of her mother's kill code pulsed with a steady, amber light. This was the moment the 20-year cycle had to break. Not with a whimper, but with a roar of pure, unadulterated humanity. "Let them try," Isola said, her voice echoing with a weight that shook the glass partitions. "They think we are processors. They think we are bridges. But a bridge can be collapsed, and a processor can be burned." On the overhead monitors, the face of Dr. Aris appeared, twisted with a mixture of professional fury and genuine terror. "Isola, stop this. The Great Sync is the only way to preserve the legacy of human genius. If you trigger that code, you won't just destroy the Syndicate. You'll erase the collective memory of the last century. You'll throw the world into a dark age." "Then let it be dark," Isola countered, her fingers dancing across the locket's interface. "A dark age where people have to look each other in the eye to know the truth. A dark age where no one owns the rhythm of another person's heart." "You don't understand the cost," Aris screamed. "Malakor understood. He sacrificed everything to keep the flame alive." "Malakor didn't keep the flame alive," Isola said, her gaze shifting to the secondary screen where the golden-tethered Malakor sat in his glass chamber. "He kept the ashes in a jar and called it a masterpiece." She looked at Malakor. In the digital depths of the system, their minds brushed against each other one last time. It was a sensation of cold silk and sharp glass. "Isola," his voice echoed in her mind, devoid of the mechanical distortion of the Syndicate's comms. "The architecture is complete. The doors are locked. I am the anchor now. If you stay, we can rule the static together. We can be the gods of the new world." "I never wanted to be a god, Malakor," she thought back, a tear tracing a path through the dust and blood on her cheek. "I just wanted to be a girl on a mountain who didn't have to fear the fire." "Then light the match," Malakor whispered. "Burn the archive. Burn me. Be the island. One last time." Isola turned to Kenji and Sophia. "Now, give them everything. Not the data, give them the feelings they tried to edit out." Kenji closed his eyes. He didn't think of the 400 terabytes of data he was supposed to process. He thought of the smell of the strawberry vapor in Tokyo. He thought of the way the rain felt on his skin. He thought of the sound of a dog barking in the distance, a sound that had no utility, no logic, only life. Sophia didn't model the future of the Syndicate's stocks. She modeled the way a linden blossom falls from a tree in Berlin. She modeled the unpredictability of a child's laughter. She modeled the chaos of a world that refused to be calculated. And Isola gave the system the fire. She fed the core every second of her 20-year imprisonment. She gave it the coldness of the observatory floor. She gave it the weight of the silk dresses that felt like shrouds. She gave it the sound of the bio-tether hum, that relentless, soul-crushing rhythm that had tried to replace her own. Neural load, 900%, 1,200%, critical overflow. The blue light of the core turned a violent, visceral purple. The glass started to spiderweb, the cracks glowing with the intensity of 1,000 suns. The Syndicate's servers, located in deep-sea vaults and mountain bunkers across the globe, began to scream. The fans couldn't move the air fast enough. The liquid nitrogen boiled away. "The Great Sync is reversing," an automated voice shrieked. "The assets are deleting the host. The orchard is being uprooted." In a high-rise in Zurich, Marcus Thorne watched as his screens turned to white noise. His global shadow state, built on the stolen genius of children, was dissolving into a digital blizzard. The bank accounts vanished. The surveillance feeds went dark. The pulse keys that controlled the world's infrastructure simply ceased to exist. No, Thorne whispered, falling back into his leather chair. It was perfect. It was a work of art. It was a cage, Marcus, a voice said from the shadows of his office. Thorne turned to see the weaver standing there, her eyes no longer hidden by her hood. She held a simple, physical match. She struck it against the mahogany desk and dropped it onto the pile of blueprints. And cages are meant to be burned. Inside the subvault, the final collapse began. The core erupted. A shockwave of pure information blasted outward, a tidal wave of light that felt like a physical weight. Isola shielded Kenji and Sophia with her body as the glass pillar disintegrated into a billion shards. The golden tether around Malakor's neck shattered. Isola looked at the screen one last time. She saw Malakor stand up. He wasn't the god-king of the observatory anymore. He was just a man in a white jumpsuit, surrounded by falling glass. He looked at the camera, at her, and mouthed two words. "Thank you." Then the feed cut to black. The sanatorium groaned as its internal supports failed. The dead air protocol was replaced by the roar of the real world. "Elias, get up!" Isola shouted, hauling the old man to his feet. They ran. They ran through the collapsing corridors, past the catatonic enforcers whose neural links had fried in the surge. They burst through the back gates and into the dark, wet woods of the Black Forest. The ambulance was waiting. Isola threw the children and Elias into the back and floored the accelerator. As they sped away, the sanatorium erupted in a series of secondary explosions. The Gothic stone crumbled into the bunker beneath it, burying the syndicate's dreams under 1,000,000 tons of German granite. The sun rose over the Mediterranean with a quiet, unscripted beauty. It had been 6 months since the digital meteor. The world had survived, though it was a different place. The internet was a ghost of its former self, a decentralized patchwork of local networks. The great shadow corporations had been dismantled, their leaders either in hiding or facing the justice of the people they had tried to automate. Isola sat on the porch of a small stone cottage on the outskirts of a village that didn't appear on any functioning GPS. The air smelled of salt, rosemary, and the wild lavender that grew in the cracks of the cliffs. Behind her, in the kitchen, she could hear the clatter of plates. Kenji was trying to teach Sophia how to make an omelette, their voices filled with the messy, beautiful arguments of children who were learning how to be human. Elias sat in a rocking chair in the corner, his mechanical eye replaced by a simple, glass one. He didn't need to see the data streams anymore. He was content to watch the clouds. Isola looked down at the table. She had a pen and a stack of cream-coloured paper. Real paper. She reached up to her neck. The scar was there, a faint, white circle. It didn't itch. It didn't pulse. It was just a mark, a map of where she had been. She began to write. They called us the orchard. They thought they could plant us in rows and harvest our thoughts like grain. They thought they could own the architecture of the human soul. They were wrong. She paused, looking out at the turquoise water. A small boat was bobbing on the horizon, its white sail catching the morning light. Malakor wanted a witness. He wanted someone to remember the beauty of the old world. But the old world was a museum of dead things. The new world is a mess. It is loud, it is unpredictable, and it is full of fire. But it is ours. We are no longer islands. We are the sea. She looked at the locket resting on the table. It was empty now, its kill code spent, its holographic heart dead. But the picture of her mother remained. Isola realized that her mother hadn't just given her a weapon. She had given her a choice. The choice to be more than a machine. A shadow fell across the paper. Isola froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a fast, erratic rhythm that belonged to her and her alone. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She knew the scent of charcoal and expensive tobacco, even after 6 months of sea air. "The ending is a bit dramatic, don't you think?" a voice rasped. It was a voice that had been hollowed out by fire and silence, but the cadence was unmistakable. Isola put down the pen. She didn't look back at the man who had been her master, her monster, and her only mirror. "It's not an ending, Malakor," she said, her voice steady and clear. "It's a first draft." The man stepped up to the railing of the porch. He was wearing a simple linen shirt, his face heavily scarred, his obsidian eyes reflecting the vastness of the ocean. He looked older, diminished, and yet, for the first time, he looked whole. "I didn't think you'd find us," she said. "I didn't find you, Isola," he said, looking out at the water. "I followed the smoke. You're still burning very brightly." "I'm not coming back to the observatory," she said. "The observatory is ash," Malakor replied. "And the curator is dead. I'm just a man who realized he forgot to read the most important book in his collection." He looked at her then, and there was no proprietary glint, no calculating weight. There was only the exhaustion of a traveller who had finally reached the end of the road. "And what book is that?" Isola asked. Malakor smiled, a small, genuine thing that didn't reach for power. "The one you're writing. I'd like to see how it ends." Isola looked at her pen, then at the children playing in the kitchen, and finally at the man standing beside her. The cycle was over. The cage was gone. The world was wide, and the ink was fresh. "It doesn't end," Isola said, picking up the pen. "It just continues." She turned back to the page and began the next sentence. Outside, the waves hit the shore with a rhythmic, unceasing pulse, the heartbeat of a world that was finally, gloriously, out of control. The sunset over the Côte d'Azur did not bleed with the violet hues of radar screens. Instead, it was a warm honey gold, pouring directly onto the calm surface of the sea. In the stone house perched precariously on the cliffside, the sound of the wind whistling through the doorframes echoed like the frantic turning of old parchment pages. Isola sat on the windowsill, her bare feet swinging to a rhythm of her own, no longer the mechanical 60 beats per minute of the metronome from her past, but a free tempo, rising and falling with the breath of the tide. She held an apple, using a small knife to peel it with meticulous care. "Don't peel too deep," a low voice rumbled from the shadows of the room. "You're wasting the sweetest part." Isola didn't flinch. She had grown accustomed to that shadow. Malakor stepped out of the darkness, his silhouette no longer stiffened by the lines of an expensive charcoal suit. He wore a white linen shirt with an open collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal a network of scars on his wrists, the remnants of the last time he had tried to tear the tether of the Ouroboros system from his flesh. "Still haven't lost the habit of observing and criticizing, have you, Malakor?" Isola gave a faint smile, but her eyes no longer held the searing hatred of those days on the Atlas Mountains. Malakor stepped closer, leaning his back against the stone frame, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sea and sky became one. "Observation is the only instinct I have left. When you no longer have an empire to manage, you realize that watching someone peel an apple is just as fascinating as tracking global financial flows." Isola offered a slice of the apple toward him. Malakor took it, but he didn't eat it immediately. He looked at Isola's hand, the hand that had once trembled with fear, that had bled to save him, and that was now unnervingly still. "How many pages did you write today?" he asked, gesturing to the notebook on the table. "Not many," she replied. "I've realized that when you're truly living, you don't have much time to record it. Perhaps you were wrong, Malakor. An archive isn't the only way to preserve beauty. Beauty lies in the fact that it will disappear." Malakor remained silent for a long time. The day's final light caught the scars on his face, highlighting his deep obsidian eyes. Eyes that had once looked at her as a precious treasure, and now looked at her as a mystery he would never fully solve. "I once thought that if I lost control, I would die," Malakor said, his voice as low as the lapping waves. "I built that observatory not to cage you, but to cage my own fear. The fear that this world is too chaotic to exist without a guide." He looked at her, a rare flash of tenderness appearing on his cold features. "But looking at you now, I realize that chaos is exactly what makes you so radiant. You aren't a painting to be preserved. You are a fire." Isola hopped down from the sill, stepping close to him. The distance between them was now only a few inches. No biotether, no coercion, only two souls ravaged by the past standing face to face in the present. She reached up, lightly touching the long scar on his cheek, the one from the explosion at the sanatorium. Malakor didn't flinch. He closed his eyes, savoring the warmth of her fingertip. It was the touch of a human, not a processor. "You are still my enemy, Malakor," Isola whispered, her breath brushing his lips. "I have not forgotten what you did. The years you stole, the secrets you buried." "I don't expect you to forget," Malakor replied, opening his eyes to look directly at her. "Forgiveness is a faulty algorithm. I only need you to continue seeing me, even if it is a gaze full of judgment." Isola withdrew her hand and smiled, a genuine smile, hiding nothing. "I will see you, but not as my curator, but as a man growing old on a distant shore, a man learning how to live in a world without servers." She turned back to the table, picked up the notebook, and handed it to him. "The last page is blank," she said. "It's for you." Malakor took the notebook, his fingers tracing the worn leather cover. "What do you want me to write?" "Anything that isn't data," Isola answered as she stepped out onto the balcony, catching the cool sea breeze. "Write about how you feel right now. Write about something that will vanish when the sun goes down." Malakor stood there watching Isola's slender but powerful silhouette against the sunset. He picked up the pen, and after a long moment of hesitation, he set it to the pristine white page. He didn't write about algorithms or the past or the future. He wrote only 3 words in a graceful, arrogant, yet sincere hand. "You are breathing." And there, on the cliffside by the sea, the final archive was closed, making way for a real life to begin. No more masters, no more slaves. Only 2 people left, in a world full of glitches, yet utterly beautiful.